Go.
I'm Ellen Eisenberg, and I wrote this on what would have been Aunt Rhoda's 80th birthday. Rhoda Zornow was my aunt. Like me, she was one of 3 sisters. She was the youngest of the 3 Stern girls. The oldest was Millie, my mother, and the middle one is Aunt Goldie. I think I was Aunt Rhoda's very first niece, since I am Millie's oldest child. Aunt Rhoda was one of the pillars of my childhood, and up until she and Uncle Leo moved to Florida for good, I saw her fairly often and always loved the time I spent with her. She was quiet, unassuming, a woman of few words, maybe a little bit shy, and very even-tempered. Unlike my mother, she never screamed and yelled at me or anyone else, at least not that I saw. She had an infectious chuckle. Her face lit up, and she shook when she laughed. Unlike my mother, she loved cats. She and Uncle Leo always seemed to have 1 or 2 cats living under their roof, and she lovingly nurtured them. She was a terrific and prolific cook and baker. Very creative and talented with her hands, Aunt Rhoda was always working on a new handicraft or project of one kind or another. I'm sure my cousin Eileen inherited much of her artistic sense from Aunt Rhoda. I must admit that Aunt Rhoda was not good at telling jokes. Living under the same roof with my Uncle Leo and my cousin David, she was sort of obliged to appreciate or perhaps tolerate their endless jokes and comedic routines. She definitely would have been eclipsed by the 2 of them if she actually tried to compete to be funny. But thank God, she could appreciate a good joke, and she really did have a great sense of humor. I also recall that she could ruin a perfectly good joke when she would ask you to tell a particular joke by identifying it up front with the punchline. She was very generous to me. When I was about 7 years old, I spent the entire Christmas vacation week with Aunt Rhoda and Uncle Leo up in New Haven. David was not even 6 months old then, yet she agreed to look after me and managed to keep me well fed and entertained for all that time. Although I do remember her encouraging me to go out in the snow and meet and play with the neighborhood kids starting at around 5:30 every morning. Another one of her key character traits was that Aunt Rhoda told the truth. Here is how I first learned that my Aunt Rhoda was an honest woman. My sisters and I were 3 unruly kids who shared one cramped bedroom in our Bronx apartment for the better, or worse, part of 18 or so years. We had a reputation for being constantly in motion, very noisy, and prone to fighting with each other. We made up games and songs, we sang loudly, we put on shows, we told jokes, we played tricks on our parents and on each other, we would sneakily borrow and wear each other's clothes, and inevitably ruin them and anything else we touched. And anything we did seemed to conclude with a fight. It didn't take much. We were 3 feisty kids who sparred physically with each other at the slightest provocation. Even if one of our legs so much as accidentally brushed against the other's leg while we were crushed together in the back seat of our car, that would precipitate a fight that almost always turned out to be some combination of 2 against 1. It drove our mother and our father nuts. And my mother, in particular, would routinely confide her frustrations about her out-of-control offspring to her sisters and our maternal grandmother. And any time we got out of hand and declared how much we couldn't stand each other, it seemed my mother and my Aunt Goldie would always recite to the 3 of us kids in unison from the same script, which sounded something like this. I don't get it. We were 3 sisters. The 3 of us grew up 3 girls in 1 room with 1 folding bed and 1 cot. We shared 1 doll and 1 carriage. We shared everything, and we never complained. We never made any noise to aggravate our parents, and we never fought. I must have heard this a squadrillion times throughout my childhood and adolescence, and it always made me feel like I was evil incarnate. That is, Until one day, when my sisters and I and all of the cousins were at Aunt Rhoda and Uncle Leo's house in New Jersey, swimming in their above-ground pool in the backyard. One of my sisters started a fight that triggered the usual, "We were 3 girls in one room," from my mother and Aunt Goldie. Just at that moment, Aunt Rhoda stood up, presumably to go into her kitchen to check on something in the oven. And as she walked past me, she looked right at me, and with a twinkle in her eye and just the hint of a smile, under her breath, and just audibly enough so that only I could hear her, she said, "Oh, that's bullshit. They fought all the time." And then she was gone. My sister Bonnie tells me that one time, years ago, she was on the phone with Aunt Rhoda and asked her about the health of one of the resident Zorno family kittens. Aunt Rhoda filled her in, and then she told Bonnie that, by the way, some people were calling her Catwoman, just like in the Batman movies, because she loved cats so much. And Bonnie said to her, "Oh no, it's really because you look just like Michelle Pfeiffer in black tights." Aunt Rhoda cracked up without missing a beat. When I was growing up, on many weekends, and on holidays like Rosh Hashanah and the first and second Seder nights of Passover, either my grandmother or one of the Stern sisters, Millie, Goldie, or Rhoda, would each take turns having the whole family over. This was a lot of work for the hostess, and all of the adults pitched in to help prepare the meal, bring dessert, and schlep over some extra folding chairs. The 7 of us cousins, David, the lone boy, and all 6 girls, would all look forward to being together to eat the traditional foods, check out the host kids' new toys, play musical instruments, explore each other's neighborhoods, generate the usual mayhem, and just have fun. As I got older, I helped set the table and carried platters of food from the kitchen to the dining room table. Then I helped clear the table and either helped wash or dry dishes when things were winding down. Of course, I never minded helping because it gave me a chance to eavesdrop on my mother and aunts as they gossiped about this one and that one. For some reason, laughing over someone they weren't fond of and who was pregnant would always fill them with mirth. Anyway, at one such family gathering, when I must have been in my late teens, which means that Aunt Rhoda must have been no more than 42 years old at the time, I was in the kitchen with the 3 Stern sisters, and my Aunt Goldie was telling my mother and Aunt Rhoda a story about someone they all knew who had done something pretty outrageous. Aunt Rhoda was at the sink, quietly listening to the story, when all of a sudden she turned around and said, "That really took balls." This left me paralyzed, speechless, and shocked to hear someone old like Aunt Rhoda actually say the word balls, much less even know how and when to use it. My sister Bonnie tells me that around the same time, she overheard Aunt Rhoda saying something sucked. And like me, Bonnie was also struck dumb, speechless, shocked that Aunt Rhoda knew this word. The stories we tell about growing up in the family we were part of make us who we are today. Each of us can identify a few special people who have had an especially strong influence, for better or worse, on the path we've chosen to take in our work, in our personal lives, or both. We call those individuals our mentors, and whether their influence was a positive or a negative one, they are among the blessings we receive in this lifetime. For me, Aunt Rhoda was a gentle mentor who taught me more than she could ever have known about being caring and loving just by who and how she was. What always impressed me was Aunt Rhoda's extraordinary love for her family and her friends. She was there for me at times when I needed it most, and especially there when my father and my mother were at the end of their lives. She really was a magnificent blessing to her friends and to me and to our whole family. I will always be so deeply grateful for her presence in my life from the start. I will miss her very much.